So when did your father get involved then?
My father left school. He was sent away to boarding school when he was about 12, and he left boarding school around 16, and then he was sent to Kilkenny to learn the business. There was no training other than learning the business hands-on. And he was sent down to the Munster House in Kilkenny, which is owned by the Duggan family, which is a huge department store in Kilkenny. And he spent, I think, 3 years there, being trained in the business and being taught the business. And he came back then to Westport. And my father had no interest in the business, sadly. And luckily for us, my mother came along and did have the interest and did have the training. And she was a superb businesswoman. But my father, sadly...
And where was your mother from?
My mother was from Miltown Malbay, County Clare.
Okay.
Her name was Vera Carroll.
And they got married?
They got married, and here I am. And I was...
And she came into the business then?
She came into the business, managed it, and she educated my 3 sisters and myself. And we were packed off to boarding school. And I was sent to university to be given the education as they thought was so important. But in fact, I think the education on the floor is the place where you learn the business hands-on. I think there's too much emphasis on formal education today.
And
all these old businessmen in Westport, whether it was old John J. O'Malley and Charlie Hughes, these were all self-made men. They didn't need to have a master's degree from Harvard to do what they did. They were extraordinary men. The other thing about it is that in Westport in those days, in the 30s and 40s, you had an extraordinary movement.
I talked about that separately now in a minute.
That's a separate
under the
thing.
chamber, yeah. And who worked in the shop under your father and mother's men?
Well, Cecil Harkin would have come in as a very young man. Cecil Harkin would have come in around 1957, and he was with us for nearly 50 years. And Cecil was fantastic. Cecil was he was a rock,
an icon.
An icon. He was a rock, and he was Cecil. Well, if there was a problem, go and ask Cecil. He was Mr. Malloy's, if you like, Mr. Malloy handed over the mantle to Cecil.
And he trained him well.
He did. He learned a lot from Cecil, but that's how you learn. You learn from other people. And Mr. Malloy taught well, as he was taught himself, and as I was taught. And Mr. Malloy taught me, and I in turn learned an awful lot from Cecil. Cecil taught me an awful lot about the business. I have to say, I learned so much from Cecil, and I did a business degree, and I learned more from Cecil than I did above in UCD. And I mean that sincerely.
And who else worked in the shop at that time?
There were many women who came to Westport as young women to work in Shanleys.
Did you have Jerry Murray there, did you?
Jerry Murray was there from Mill Street, yes.
How long was he there for?
Probably about 25 years, I should think. One person I remember particularly also was one of the McKennas, the old family, the Barbers in Westport. Frank McKenna worked with us for a little while, and the member of your opera society, Patsy Staunton was with us. The more I think of it, the more people were with us, and we had a high turnover of people who moved on, married, left town, emigrated, and so on.
Set up their own as well.
Set up their own businesses, etc. And indeed, there are 2 other businesses in Westport who set up directly from us.
Who were they?
Well, John O'Brien worked with us.
Okay.
And Paddy Bree, Pat's father. And they all made their contribution, and I will give credit where it's due. I have...
were they with your grandfather or your father?
They worked with my grandfather. And subsequently would have been really with my grandfather. Yeah.
And on the ladies' side then, who in the last...
Well, as I was saying to you, the ladies, because of the restrictions, most of the women had to retire at a young age and marry and move on. And latterly we'd have had Maureen Halpin, John O'Malley, we'd have had Bernie Scahill, we'd have had Marie Ruan, we had Anne Kelly and her sister Marion. There were so many. We had Joan O'Malley from Kilmena, and then we had Mary Higgins, who worked with us back in the 50s, and she's married to Jim Moran. She was Mary Higgins then, down in Roscahill. I remember Mickey Hastings, his wife came to Westport to work with us, Bridie. She was known then, she came from Castlebar, Bridie Hernan. And many other women came and went. And of course there was Ursula Crawford from Castlebar Street, who was the bookkeeper and had to manage the books, if you like. She was managing the visa accounts, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And she sadly lost her husband there some years ago. And but all of these women all had to, well, some of the other women came to us after they were married, laterally. But we always had lovely people working with us, lovely people, and they all left their mark.
And the wind of change came into there?
Gradually, and once the wind of change came, and once the motor car changed everything, of course, it gave people choices. They didn't have to shop in Westport. So you were no longer competing with the man up the street. You were not competing with the Castlebars, the Galways. You were competing with or Sligo's or Dublin or whatever. The motor car changed everything. People had the mobility. So people now were moving. And then came the chain stores, and it all changed completely. And then you can buy your clothes in Tesco or in Aldi now, or Lidl. You can buy your clothes above in Ellery Sports. You can buy them in Port West, how the workwear. We're the only people who sold workwear at the time. So everything has changed. I don't think for the better, but it has changed.
The cake was shared out to more people?
No, the multiples just took the bigger slice of the cake.
Yeah.
There's less of the cake to go around.
Yeah.
The slice is smaller.
So when did you shut down?
We shut down in 2006.
2006.
Yeah.
After how many years?
We shut down the main shop and we continued trading. Helen, my wife, then started a business called Cluna Designs. And we ran that as part in parallel with Shanleys. And we handed over part of the building to Cluna Designs, and Helen, my wife, started up Cluna Designs there, and she brought in to work with her Kathleen Malone, and Kathleen and Helen developed a very successful and a very prosperous and one of the best businesses in the West for what they were doing. A very specialist niche market, clothing and jewellery, very different, very upmarket. And when we left Bridge Street, we continued trading under Cluna Designs on James's Street. So Cluna Designs went on until after 2008. So we made the 100 years. We made the 100 years.